Hello and welcome to my story. Eva's hands were shaking, her heart was pounding as she reached for her phone. She had deleted another secret message from Victor. She thought hiding it would bring peace to her marriage, but it had brought temptation right next to her. What started as an innocent flirtation quickly turned into something Eva couldn't control. Faced with an impossible choice between the man she's now married to and the neighbor who ignited a fire she thought long extinguished, will Eva choose safety or risk everything for a chance at true passion? Like the video if you want part 2. Eva stood in her new kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows. Everything looked perfect, but there was an uneasy feeling inside her. She ran her hand over the smooth countertops and had thoughts that everything she and James wanted was empty. But why did she feel like something was missing? James came home one day, his eyes sparkling with excitement, talking about how they needed a fresh start. Eva thought that a change of scenery could rekindle the excitement in their marriage. They had looked online for weeks, dreaming of a simpler life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. When they finally found this place, it felt like fate. A charming country house with a large garden in a quiet neighborhood. James had practically begged Eva to say yes, and she had nodded her head, caught up in his excitement. And the house had a pool that would have suited James. Now, standing in the house of her dreams, Eva couldn't help wondering if they had made a mistake. The first few weeks were spent settling in. Sundays were rather lazy, but there were unexpected difficulties. The water pressure was terrible, and Eva quickly realized that she missed the convenience of the shops and restaurants around the corner. As the days and weeks passed, Eva's restlessness increased. She woke up early and wandered the empty rooms of the house while James slept soundly. She stood in the garden, surrounded by flowers and birdsong, and felt completely alone. It was beautiful here, peaceful even, but Eva couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then came the day that changed everything. Eva was pruning her rose bushes when she heard the rumble of a truck. She looked up, wondering who her new neighbors were, and that's when she saw him, Victor. He was tall, with dark hair and a very attractive smile. They looked at each other for a few seconds. From that day on, Eva, found herself in a constant internal struggle. She tried to push thoughts of Victor aside and focus on her marriage and making this new life work. But no matter what she did, her thoughts always returned to the man next door, and these glances had increased recently on the farm. James came home from work full of plans for their future. He talked about hosting dinner parties, maybe even starting a family. Eva smiled and nodded, but at the same time she felt like a fraud. How could she tell him that the life she was so excited about was suffocating her? The nights were the worst. She would stare at the ceiling, and her mind would wander to thoughts of Victor. What was he doing right now? Did she ever think about him? These thoughts usually came around 4 a.m., when everyone was asleep. Sometimes, in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Eva would turn and look at James. She would study his face, trying to remember why she had fallen in love with him in the first place. He was a good man, kind and stable. He had never hurt her, never disappointed her, so why was she now attracted to the man she had seen in the garden? James had done nothing. Eva should be grateful for this life, because James had done everything for it. I'm going to start telling it myself. When I saw Victor at the local market, I couldn't believe my eyes. My heart started beating fast, and I felt like a teenager in love. When I reached for a bunch of carrots, our hands touched, and I jumped back and dropped my basket. The oranges scattered all over the place, and it was the most embarrassing moment of my life. But Victor just smiled and helped me pick everything up. His fingers touched mine as he handed me back my basket, and I swear my heart was pounding. A few days later, I was in the garden when I heard Victor's voice. "Have fun," he called over the fence. I turned to face him, and my heart started pounding. We started chatting about gardening, and before I knew it, an hour had passed. I felt more alive in that conversation than I had in years. Victor's eyes lit up as he talked about his favorite flowers, and I found myself looking into his eyes. That hour passed as fast as a minute. When James came home that evening, he was excited to meet the new neighbors. "We should invite them over for dinner," he told me. "Of course, love," I said, trying to hide my excitement at the thought of seeing Victor again. James had no idea what was going on between us, but I didn't mind. Over the next few weeks, Victor and I found more and more excuses to spend time together, bumping into each other at the mailbox or watering our flowers. Each time I told myself it was innocent, just two neighbors being friendly, but deep down inside I knew it was more than that. The guilt began to eat away at me. After every interaction with Victor, I felt a mixture of excitement and shame. As I found myself trusting Victor more and more, I realized that I was distancing myself from James. I started not talking to my husband as much as I confided in Victor about everything. One day, I was at a local cafe when Victor walked in and we met. We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories. When I got home, James asked me why I was so late. I lied. I said I lost track of time while I was reading. It was a painful feeling. One night when James and I were in bed, everything came to a climax. He leaned down to kiss me, and I imagined myself kissing Victor, and I pulled back, surprised at my own thoughts. I stayed awake that night, tears silently running down my face. How had I let it come to this? I loved James, I really did, but Victor made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I was torn between my loyalty to my husband and this new, exciting connection with Victor, and I had no idea how to find my way out. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't help myself. That morning I put on my tightest and shortest garden shorts and a low-cut top. After making sure Victor was home, I went outside to tend to my roses. I bent down to pluck a weed, knowing full well that he could see me from his window. I was putting on a show of sorts for him. I was sure he loved it. I couldn't sleep that night. James was snoring softly next to me, but all I could think about was Victor. Before I knew what I was doing, I grabbed my phone and went out onto the cold balcony. My hands were shaking as I dialed his number. "Hello," his sleepy voice answered. We talked for hours, our voices barely above a whisper. I felt like a teenager again, sneaking behind my parents' backs. The next day, I almost invited Victor home. James was working late, and the house felt so empty. I felt lonely and had bad feelings. I wrote a message, my finger hovering over the send button, but at the last minute I gave up. What if James comes home early? What if the neighbors see? I deleted the message, but my desire to see Victor was still there. One afternoon, Victor came over to help me carry the heavy flower pots. We were laughing about something silly when James walked in unexpectedly. I turned away from Victor, as if trying to hide it. James looked puzzled, his eyes darting back and forth between us. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked. I quickly made up a lie about it being too heavy. A few weeks later, there was a barbecue in the neighborhood. I'd had a few glasses of wine, and my inhibitions had eased. I found myself openly flirting with Victor, laughing out loud at his jokes, touching his arm. I could feel the other neighbors watching us, whispering, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered at that moment was the way Victor looked at me. Victor took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I knew I should back away, run home to James, but I never wanted to leave. He reached out and gently stroked a lock of hair from my face with his fingers. This simple touch gave me goosebumps. "Eva," he whispered, his voice low and husky, and then it happened. His lips were on mine, so delicate. But as fast as it all started, reality came back just as fast. I pulled myself back, tears in my eyes. What had I done? Guilt washed over me like a tidal wave, threatening to drown me. I looked at Victor, saw the mixture of desire and concern in his eyes. "Eva, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have," he started, but I cut him off. "No, I can't do this." I choked, and then I started running towards the house. I burst through the front door and locked myself in the bathroom, collapsing on the floor as sobs racked my body. What kind of person was I? How could I do this to James? I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard James' voice on the other side of the door. "Eva, honey, are you okay?" The concern in his voice made me feel even worse. "I'm fine," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't feel well. I'll be out in a minute," I said, feeling a little sick. I splashed some water on my face, trying to wipe away the traces of my tears. That night, when James was asleep, I felt like waking him up and telling him how stupid I'd been. How could I tell him I'd betrayed him? That I'd kissed another man, and worse, enjoyed it. I couldn't look at Victor for days after that kiss. James was starting to realize something was wrong. He was asking me if I was okay. He was trying to read my face with his worried eyes. I was mumbling some excuse that I was tired or stressed from the move, but I could tell he didn't believe it. How could he when I could barely look him in the eye? I threw myself into housework like a possessed woman, scrubbing floors, organizing cupboards, anything to keep my hands and mind busy, spending hours in the garden pulling weeds until my fingers hurt and bled. At least that made more sense than kissing that man. As the days went by, I found myself getting angry at James for no reason. He would ask me what I wanted for dinner, and I would snap at him, telling him to figure it out on his own. The poor guy looked so confused and hurt, and it only made me feel worse. It wasn't his fault. I was a terrible wife who couldn't control her emotions. Every time he managed to sneak out to see her, it was like a shot of adrenaline in his heart. They would meet at the little cafe in town or go for a walk in the park. Eva lived for those stolen moments. His smile, the way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the world, made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. My friend continued. Then one night James dropped the bomb. "Hey, why don't we invite Victor to dinner this week?" And Eva felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Her mind tried to come up with an excuse, any excuse, but before James could stop her, she had already picked up her phone to text. Victor. Eva spent the next few days in a panic. How was she going to get through a whole evening pretending everything was normal? The night of the dinner party was torture. At one point, James said something about how well Eva and Victor got on. "Isn't it great that we have such good neighbors, honey?" Eva was sipping her wine, wishing she knew the truth. The guilt was overwhelming, but so was her desire for Victor. She wanted to confess everything and pretend that nothing had happened. That night, Eva stayed awake long after James had fallen asleep. Her mind was spinning. She loved James. She really did. She loved him. He was kind and stable, and he had been there for her for years. Victor made her feel things she thought she would never feel again. Eva realized she was going to have to make a choice, and soon before someone got hurt more than they already were. The question was, could she live with the consequences of that choice? One day we had been careless. Victor was at my house. We were laughing about something when we heard James's car in the driveway. He shouldn't have been home for hours. I pushed Victor into the cloakroom. My heart was racing as James walked through the door. I said, "Hey honey, you're home early." He looked at me strangely, trying to keep my voice steady. He asked me why I was blushing so much. He asked me why I was so flushed. I mumbled something about cleaning. Victor remained silent as he hid behind the cupboard only a meter away. Another time I had left my phone open on the kitchen counter. Victor had sent me a text. It wasn't anything too incriminating, but it certainly wasn't something I wanted James to see. I realized my mistake with a jolt of horror. I ran back into the kitchen praying James wouldn't see it. I grabbed the phone just as he walked in. He gave me a strange look. He asked who I was texting. I lied. I told him it was just my sister, but I could see the suspicion in his eyes. I think James was slow to notice. I had been very careful for a long time, but I think it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. I walked into the kitchen, and James was holding my phone, and I panicked for a moment. What if he saw my messages? "What is it, Eva?" James' voice was low and dangerous as he picked up the phone, and I saw the messages from Victor on the screen. Yes, I was finished, guys. What was I going to do? What would you have done, James? I started, but then don't lie to me. He yelled. I read everything. How long has this been going on? How could you fucking do this to me? James wanted to know every detail of my relationship with Victor, and I found myself tearfully telling him everything. I told him about our first meeting in the market, our conversations in the garden, the kiss that changed everything. I couldn't stop talking. It was like once I started, I couldn't hold anything back anymore. James was running his hands through my hair, interrogating me. Did you sleep with him? No. I immediately said, no, it wasn't like that. But you wanted to, didn't you? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The look of utter devastation on James' face will haunt me forever. He looked at me like he didn't even know who I was anymore. Then, without a word, he turned and walked out the front door. Yes, he left in his car right away. It was night time, and I got down on my knees and started crying. You know how happy we were in 1990. I don't know how long I sat there crying. We could have talked about it. We could have somehow fixed what I had broken, but as the hours passed and the house was silent, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. When I finally heard the knock at the door, I turned to her. My eyes were red and swollen from crying, and I looked like I had aged 10 years in just a few hours. Eva, she said, her voice hoarse, we need to talk. I want you to make a choice. James said. The words me or him hit me like a punch in the stomach. How could I choose? I loved James, but Victor still made me feel something different. James, I'm so sorry. I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. We talked for hours, going over every moment of our marriage, trying to understand where things went wrong. James asked me questions about Victor that I didn't want to answer. I don't know. As the sun began to rise, James looked at me with great pain in his eyes. Do you love me anymore? He asked, and with a jolt I realized that I didn't know how to answer that question. Eva, who had married James, loved him with all her heart, but was I still that woman, or had I changed so much that I didn't even recognize myself anymore? James had always been so sure of himself and our relationship, and now here he was questioning everything because of my behavior. I had destroyed not only his confidence in me, but his confidence in himself. How could I fix this? I need some time, I said to James, to sort things out. He nodded. He looked defeated. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll stay with my brother, he said. So what was going to happen next? I knew I had to face Victor and tell him what had happened. I walked towards his house. My legs felt like lead with every step. When he opened the door and saw my face, he knew something was wrong. I told him everything, how James found out, how our secret was out. Victor's reaction surprised me. I expected anger or disappointment, but instead I saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He started, but I cut him off. I don't know what it means. I said, I need time to think about it. One day, as I was going through our wedding album, I realized what I was going to lose, not just my marriage, but our whole life together, our home full of memories, the future we had planned together. All those shared dreams were now hanging by a thread. I traced James' smiling face in the photographs, wondering if he would ever look at me that way again. Shortly after James moved in, the whispers began. Our neighbors were not subtle in their judgment. I'd catch them staring when I went to pick up the mail, or whispering behind their hands in the grocery store. She's the one who cheated on her husband with her neighbor. Can you believe it? Her words hurt, but I knew I deserved it. I'd made my bed, now I had to sleep in it. Then I decided to go to a therapist, and I was shocked. When the therapist asked me, tell me why you are here, I wanted to laugh. Wasn't it obvious? I cheated on my husband. I destroyed our marriage. It dawned on me one day watching James working in the garden, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is what true love looks like, not grand gestures or heart-stopping passion. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I realized that what Victor and I had wasn't love, it was infatuation. a fantasy that could never live in the real world. The night James and I finally had to decide if our marriage was worth fighting for, we spent the morning talking until the sun came up, laying out our fears, our hopes, our doubts, everything. It was painful but also strangely beautiful when the first rays of light began to peek through the curtains. We both knew we weren't ready to give up on each other, not yet. Looking back now, I can see how close I came to throwing away everything that mattered for a brief moment of excitement. I learned the hard way that love isn't always easy. Sometimes it means making a hard choice to stay and overcome hard things. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm grateful for the lessons it taught me about myself, about James, about what really matters in life. We are still healing, we are still rebuilding. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hope for our future together. If you are watching this, if you are thinking of crossing that line, let me tell you, the price of forbidden love is higher than you can imagine. It's not just about the excitement or the passion. It's about the trust you break, the lives you shatter, and the pieces you have to pick up afterwards. Please subscribe and like. I love you.